show up with ice creams or something. It's lime too. On a hot day, a lime popsicle. You are being weird. He's teaching you to tap. Yes, that's true. Yeah. This microphone's a lot better than my phone, I can tell you that right now. It's so clear. Oh, you also have a volume thing for your headphones. So, or too loud or too soft, whatever. Oh, that's good right there. Any adjustments you want to make. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live, Friday edition. As usual on Fridays, Darren gave us a great lineup. Wonderful 2 hours ahead. Second hour, Trent Horn will be here. We're going to talk about the church and the world, all kinds of stuff to cover from that angle, and Trent is the guy to cover it with. This hour, we're going to talk about the reliability of the Gospels. Can you trust them? It seems like there are so many arguments against the reliability of the Gospels, so many ways to say, well, yeah, if you want to believe that, yes, but there's no particular reason to give them any more credence, say, than the myths about Zeus and Apollo and maybe the stories of Homer and all that. Is that true, or are they a thing of a different nature? 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. You are welcome to call with your questions about the reliability of the Gospels. 888-318-7884. And here to help us work through those questions is Father Sebastian Walsh. Father Walsh is a Norbertine priest of the Abbey of St. Michael in the Diocese of Orange, where he is a professor of philosophy for the seminary program. Father Walsh holds a master's in sacred theology and a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, also known as the Angelicum. And he's in studio with us, which is a delight. We rarely get that opportunity. As a matter of fact, this is, this morning we recorded some stuff, but other than that, it's the first time we've had you in studio.
That's right. For a live show, that's for sure. A couple years ago, I did a recorded interview with Trent years ago, but this is the first time live.
Well, we're glad to have you here. Thank you for being with us. And I mentioned we did some recording with you earlier this morning. Catholic Answers Focus, Father did 2 of them with us on marriage, so look for those. Those will be coming out in the coming weeks. And if you're not a member of Radio Club, you might not know when these focus things are coming out, so consider joining Radio Club at CatholicAnswersLive.com. We don't ask you for anything but an email to send you free stuff to, CatholicAnswersLive.com. Okay, so the Gospels, are they reliable? I suppose one thing we might settle first is, what are they before we are? I mean, are they meant as histories? There's no other literary form called gospel anywhere that I know of. So what are these things?
Yeah, the word gospel means good news, right? It's good news, and in that sense, you're saying there's news here, right? There's news. Is it news in the same way that a newspaper prints out news? Maybe not exactly. But not because it's not historical. In fact, the Gospels are intended to be historical documents. They're telling you things that really happened in history, but they're telling you those things in a way that really focuses on what's essential. right? It's not just sort of a smattering. It's not just a keeping of history in a random way. I'll get to that in a little bit when we talk a little bit about seeming inconsistencies among the synoptic gospels, for example. But fundamentally, they're historical documents that are reliable. At the same time, they're profound theological documents that are communicating profound theological revelation. They're not meant just to be a story, an interesting story. They're meant to be the truths upon which our salvation depends.
Again, 888-318-7884 is the number. Okay, so they tell the truth, but say not in the way, say, a newspaper does, or the way, I don't know, say a biography does.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So first of all, the aim of the Scriptures is saving truth, right?
Okay.
That's what they're trying to do. A common misconception in reading any of Scripture, not just the Gospels, any of Scripture, is to read it as if the primary intent of the sacred author is to communicate, for example, some scientific truth. You know, for example, when you're reading the opening chapters of Genesis, people read that and they think the primary thing that's going on here is astronomy, right?
Yeah.
Instead of recognizing, well, actually the primary thing that's going on here is the communication of truths necessary, helpful for our salvation.
Okay.
And that's the first thing. Look at the aim of the Gospels.
Okay, so if I could give you some I don't know, objections to the
Sure.
idea that they bear a relationship to reality. First, frankly, we are an age of science,
Yes.
and they contradict science.
Yeah.
The Gospels.
Okay. Yeah, and that, again, that objection could even be taken more broadly and perhaps even more forcefully when you're talking about Scripture in general. So I want to back up and say, let's look at a passage from the Old Testament, and then let's look at a passage from the New Testament and see how in both cases, if we understand it correctly, we're not going to see an opposition between revelation and science. So the classic locus, the classic place where people say, hey, Scriptures contradict what we know from science are the opening chapters of Genesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in those opening chapters, you hear about 7 days of creation, and and then man was created from the earth, and then etc. And supposedly the world is 6,000 years old or something. But all of that is not found in the gospel, in the Scripture passage. Read the text of Genesis. On what day was the sun created? The sun was created on the 4th day. Now that means that the first 3 days could not have possibly been one revolution of the sun around the earth. The sun didn't exist. So clearly the sacred author does not intend you to take those 7 days of creation as 7 24-hour days.
Right.
And then going even further into the text, think about this. The plants are created before the sun. Now, any ordinary first century farmer knows you can't have plants without sunlight.
Right.
And so even an ordinary simple farmer in agrarian society in Palestine in the 12th century BC or wherever, reading the book of Genesis would say, that's not a temporal order there. It's not a temporal order. There must be some other order. So then you ask yourself this question. Well, what is the reason for the order there? Maybe it's not about 24-hour days. Maybe it's not even about a temporal sequence at all. And I look and I see, oh, look, there's water and earth first. Then there's plants. Then there's heavenly bodies. Then there's animals. Then there's man. Look at that order. Water and earth are for the sake of nourishing the life of plants. Plants and luminous bodies are for the sake of animals who have sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And then animals and all of the previous ones are for the sake of man. So now we see, and that's important because in the ancient world they worshipped heavenly bodies and things like that.
Yes.
So it's important to communicate a truth necessary for our salvation. What did God intend for what? And the 7 days of creation is really an accounting of what God had in his mind about what was made for which purpose, and how the highest of things is man, and then the next down on the scale is animals, and so forth.
Yeah.
And that's helpful for our salvation. But the whole thing about, 24 hours, 7 days, and the world being 6,000 years old, what does that have to do with our salvation?
Right.
And it's not in the text. It's not in the text. So there's an example from the Old Testament.
Okay.
We can do something similar in the New Testament. We can look at things that seem to be either historic or scientific falsifications. We might read about Quirinius was the governor, at the time of Jesus' birth, and then, we look for some historical documentation of that, and there seem to be, diverse, sources that say different things about that. We might look at something like the resurrection of the dead or the miracles that Jesus performs and say, see, that contradicts science.
Yes.
And in those cases, too, if you're reading the text carefully, right, sometimes you think the text is asserting something that's historical when maybe it's not. Other times, the problem is that the historical records that we have may not be accurate, and the scriptures are accurate, right?
Yeah.
And I've always found it funny when people say, oh, we found this one archaeological dig and it contradicts what the Bible says, and suddenly the Bible's wrong.
Yeah, right. Right. You have two sources
reason.
from the ancient world.
Right,
Why
exactly.
you pick that one. Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, when we start looking at miracles, again, this has nothing to do with science. Science, if anything, science tells us that it's not the full explanation of anything. Right? A real scientist tells you, we don't even know all the causes in the natural world.
Yeah.
For the same reason, we couldn't claim universal knowledge over what God could and couldn't do, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that God couldn't perform miracles like a resurrection or something like that is laughable in the face of what an authentic scientist would admit.
Right.
So
Yeah.
So even those seeming events that contradict what's falsely called science in the Gospels are easily reconciled.
Okay, so we addressed then the claim that it's not reliable because it contradicts science, and sometimes people say, well, it contradicts modern understanding or that kind of thing. But basically, what they mean is science.
Yeah.
There's a couple more I want to get to, but we have to take a quick break.
Okay,
All right?
great.
All right, we're talking about the reliability of the Gospels with Father Sebastian Walsh. 888-318-7884 is the number. Right back after this.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you want to end abortion, halt the attack on traditional marriage, and ensure religious freedom for ourselves and for our grandchildren? To do this, we must convert the culture. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a grassroots initiative that recognizes this need and takes it to the streets. If you're interested in peacefully sharing the gospel in your area, visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Vatican officials will meet to decide the fate of disgraced former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick.
Pro-life leaders applauding the president's strong stand for life.
A new poll finds most Americans, including those identifying as pro-choice, are opposed to late-term abortion.
And Pope Francis says the death penalty is contrary to the gospel.
News headlines you can have faith in. Weekdays at the top of the hour on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest this hour. Father is a Norbertine priest, and you might be saying, well, you have a lot of Norbertine priests on there. Yeah, he is a member of the same monastery as our chaplain, Father Hugh Barber, who's away for a little bit, and we're grateful you came down to take care of us spiritually today.
Well, it's a community effort. A lot of us have, as you know, have been coming down to celebrate the masses in the morning, and so we're happy to cover for our comfort.
So you're saying it takes an entire community to care for the spiritual needs of Catholic Answers?
I was just saying that Father Hugh does the work of entire community.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Again, 888-318-7884, the number, 888-318-7884. Our topic, the reliability of the Gospels. What about this one? Because at least on the surface level, this appears to be just true. I mean, the Gospels contradict themselves.
That's a great question, yeah. When we look at the Scriptures, we see many apparent contradictions there. And the key word there is apparent. Huh?
Okay.
It's really important to understand what a contradiction is. I teach logic, and I often give this example to my students when I'm teaching logic or I'm teaching questions like predestination. I say, are these contradictory statements? I move my own will, and God moves my will. And they say, oh yeah, that's a contradiction. And I say, well, actually, a contradiction has the same subject and the same predicate, But in the first case, you affirm the predicate of the subject. In the second case, you deny the predicate of the subject. And
right. Okay, that's a logical contradiction.
exactly. So the contradiction of I move my own will is I do not move my will, right? And
Yes.
so someone thinks there's a contradiction in predestination when in fact it's not. There's not even the same subject of the sentence there. God is the subject in one case and I'm the subject in the other.
Right.
And those might be reconcilable facts, that God moves my will and I move my will. Huh? So you need to do the same thing when you look at the scriptures. Make sure you've got the same subject, the same predicate, and with the same meaning. All right? So, for example, you're reading through the passages when it talks about the resurrection. And there's many accounts where it says, well, in one account it says there's 3 women, another account it says there's 2 women, and one account it says that there's an angel that comes down and rolls the stone away, and another account there's no angel there, and another account says there's 2 angels, another account says there's 1 angel, and so forth. You're reading through these synoptic resurrection accounts, and you're thinking these are all contradictory. But remember, that's not a contradiction. It may be, and St. Augustine has a wonderful interpretation when he, in his Harmony of the Gospels, it may well be that as you're going through these different texts, that each of the accounts that are being given are recounting one time rather than another time, right? They're not happening at the same time. At one occasion, Mary Magdalene visited the tomb and saw 1 angel. On another occasion, she came back and there were 2, and so forth, right?
Yep.
Another thing I like to point out is this, that each of the gospel writers had a particular theological intent for their gospel. For example, St. Luke really focused on the priesthood of Christ. St. Matthew, the kingship of Christ or whatever. And because of that, they want to narrow in on some very particular aspect of our Lord's life. And being good teachers, they therefore intentionally leave out details. If you were teaching physics, for example, and you're trying to explain to the young people in your physics class the physics of a falling body, right? You're not going to tell them all about how the gravity acts on the body, and then there's also viscosity from the air, and make sure you know what humidity is. And then, by the way, take into account the position of the moon and the planet Jupiter because their gravity pulls. No. You abstract and you ignore the effects, the other incidental effects that aren't really focusing on the point you're trying to make.
Yes, yeah.
And the same thing happens in the Gospels.
Right.
So, the reason why, for example, St. Luke doesn't mention the angel that St. Matthew mentions is because that would be a distraction from his theological vision. Now, let's give you a really clear example from another passage in Scripture, the account of the temptations.
Okay.
We have an account of the temptations of Christ in Luke's Gospel and in Matthew's Gospel. But the order of the temptations is reversed. Because in Luke's Gospel, you have first the temptation to change stones into bread, then the temptation to be made a king, then the temptation to throw himself from the parapet of the temple.
Mm-hmm.
But in Matthew's Gospel, the first temptation is the same. But the second temptation is to throw himself from the parapet of the temple, and the third temptation is to be made king. And someone says, they read that, they say, that's a contradiction. There's no way you can hold both things happened. It can't be both. Well, read the text. If you read St. Luke's Gospel in contrast to Matthew's Gospel, one little word gets changed, and it's a connecting word. In St. Matthew's Gospel, it says, Jesus was tempted to turn stones into bread. Then he was tempted to be throw himself from the pinnacle of the temple. Then he was tempted to be made king. But in Luke's Gospel, it has a Greek word kai, which means and.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was tempted to make stones into bread, and he was tempted to be made king, and he was tempted to throw himself from the pinnacle of the temple. Now, if someone asks you, what did you do today? You can say, well, I recorded a podcast with Cy, then I recorded a podcast with Trent, then I did a radio show with Cy.
Right.
And then I could have also said, I did a radio show with Cy, and I did a podcast with Trent, and I did another podcast with Cy.
Both are equally true.
They're both true because and doesn't signify temporal sequence. And Luke intentionally changed that word precisely to avoid the contradiction.
He was trying to make a point.
He was trying to make a theological point. St. Matthew's Gospel is about Christ's kingship. So what's the last temptation? To be made king.
Yeah.
Luke's Gospel is about Christ's priesthood. What's the last temptation? to throw himself from the parapet of the temple, which I interpret that as meaning to be made high priest.
Yeah,
So-
we often do that, and sometimes annoyingly so. People do that to each other where we focus on the thing that is not the point the other person was trying to make. Where we say, oh, wait, I'm trying to make this point, and you focus on this thing over here. Sometimes it's a misdirection that's intentional. Sometimes it's just an annoying feature of the human mind that you got that detail wrong. But that's not what I'm getting at. This is what...
So my advice, read this text very carefully, actually see what it's saying, and also remember that they're leaving things out on purpose for a higher aim, because any good teacher does that.
Yeah.
If you didn't, everything would be a jumbled mass of confusion.
All right, one more contradiction, and then we'll go to calls. 888-318-7884, or
One more difficulty, objection.
One more difficulty, but it's not a contradiction, but one more difficulty. And that is this, and it has always seemed to me that this is the weakness in, and you may correct me on this, in C.S. Lewis's argument of liar, lunatic, or Lord.
Yeah.
There's a fourth possibility, which is propaganda. These people made this stuff up.
Absolutely.
So what about the possibility, I don't trust the Gospels because, look, these people had an agenda. You yourself said they're trying to make a point.
Yes.
So maybe they just kind of, around the edges or even right down the middle, they made a lot of this stuff up.
Absolutely, right. Now, of course, they themselves deny that, but you would say in response to that, well, of course they're going to deny it, right? That's their plan. So, but here's the telltale evidence. There's really two pieces, I think, of telltale evidence. The first one is kind of obvious, and that is we know historically these people gave their lives for the gospel. It's hard to find someone who give their life for a lie. It's really hard to find a dozen people that'll do it.
Yeah.
So there's one thing. But this is the most significant evidence, in my opinion. The Gospels are filled with embarrassing details, especially some of the most important parts of the Gospels. Let me give some examples. The first witnesses to the resurrection are women. Now, that doesn't strike us as strange, but to a first century Jew, that would be very strange because...
Why should we believe them?
Women were not even permitted to testify in court
right.
at that time. They were considered unreliable.
Yeah.
And then we have these other problems. Namely, Jesus is barely recognized, in fact, usually unrecognized when he appears in this resurrection. Now, that's an embarrassing detail. It's a really embarrassing fact that even his own disciples can't recognize Jesus when he's resurrected.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says there's 500 people that go out, and on one occasion when he's about to ascend into heaven, it says, and they worship, but some doubted.
Yeah.
These are not helpful details.
Right.
And then all the details about the moral and intellectual problems of the apostles.
And especially Peter.
Oh my gosh, right.
Yeah.
And so if you're someone who's trying to write propaganda, you're doing an awful job.
It's terrible propaganda.
Yeah.
All right.
The reason why they put in those embarrassing details about Jesus is because that's what happened.
888-318-7884 is the number. Our guest is Father Sebastian Walsh. Our topic this hour, are the Gospels reliable? We'll start with Matt in Urbana, Illinois. Matt, your question for Father Sebastian Walsh.
Hi.
Hi, Matt.
Thanks a lot, guys. Huge fan of the show. Love you, Cy.
Thank you.
So my question is, so given that the Exodus narrative seems to be generally known as not historical, a historical event, so there doesn't seem to be much archaeological evidence for it, etc., even by Catholic historians. Then, given that, why is it that when Jesus is transfigured, the actual one of the people who he speaks to is Moses?
Okay, I just want to make sure that I have it clear, Matt. Your sense is that modern scholarship suggests that Moses is not a real person, and am I right?
Either not a real person or not a highly influential figure, given that.
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
how is this a testimony to Jesus if a made-up guy appeared to him? I guess.
Yeah.
Or appeared with him is what I mean.
Yeah. I guess what I would do in that case, I challenge the premise first of all. I don't think that it's a consensus among Catholic scholars even that Moses was not a real person, nor that he wasn't an influential person. Even among pretty radically liberal Catholic scholars and many Protestants, they admit that Moses was a real person who was responsible for parts of the Pentateuch. The traditional Catholic view is that he wrote nearly all of the Pentateuch, and so the first thing is to ask yourself the simple question, and that is, evaluate the arguments that are given that supposedly demonstrate that Moses didn't exist, or that if he did exist, he was insignificant. Okay? That'd be my first piece of advice on this case. And what you'll find is the arguments and the evidence for that are very, very flimsy. I was, presented with many of these things in my own education, and when I challenged those arguments, they didn't have much to stand on. But secondly, let's say, even granting the premise for a moment, how does that make it ahistorical or unhistorical that Jesus appears with Moses on the Mountain of Transfiguration? Because if in fact there was a real person named Moses who was in some way responsible for the scriptures, even if it was not as much as traditional Catholics would like to believe, that doesn't prevent the fact that Moses could have appeared there on the Mountain of Transfiguration. Now, probably it was a representation of Moses because Moses had already died, and unless Moses was bodily assumed into heaven or somewhere else, then it wouldn't have likely have been his physical body, but nevertheless, an image or representation of Moses could have taken place, and that in no way argues against the historicity of the Transfiguration account written in the Gospels.
Is that convincing to you, Matt, or do you have a follow-up?
I do have a quick follow-up. I was really just getting that from the Catholic Study Bible, 3rd edition. It has a pre-article, I guess, by Lori Brink that goes through all the archaeological evidence for Exodus, and even goes so far as to suggest that Moses did not write the Pentateuch. But,
I would challenge some of that scholarship, and I would look at some other more balanced scholarship. For example, the Navarre Bible has some nice stuff in the beginning of its account of Exodus that gives you a more balanced account. The problem is sometimes scholars have an agenda themselves, and maybe there's some propaganda going the other way, so beware of that.
I remember just a few years ago, people saying there was no King David, and now there's more and more archaeological evidence that it turns out there was a King David.
Yeah.
So we'll be right back. We're talking about the reliability of the Gospels with Father Sebastian Walsh. Your call's welcome, 888-31-TRUTH.
This is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Thank you for listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" Turns out that today, as back then, this question has a lot of different answers. So many groups want to appropriate Jesus, tweaking his identity until he looks and sounds just like one of them. But then you no longer have the Lord, says apologist Trent Horn. You have an imposter. In his new groundbreaking book, Counterfeit Christ, Trent exposes 18 phony versions of Jesus that we encounter today, helping you to recognize the fakes when you see them, explain why they're phony, and make a case for the full truth and beauty of who Jesus is, the Christ, the Son of the living God. Order your copy of Counterfeit Christ today by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
A generation ago, Christian parents didn't have to worry about how to explain transgenderism to their 9-year-old children, or help their teenager deal with mockery at school for believing in traditional marriage. But today, as our culture decays, we have to know how to talk to our children about these issues. In Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, Layla Miller and Trent Horn give parents the crucial tools and techniques to form children with the understanding they need, appropriate to their age and maturity level to meet the world's challenges. If we're not teaching our children how to understand tough moral issues, then the world will. Read Made This Way and learn how to give your kids a firm foundation on which to build a life of moral clarity and happiness. Order your copy of Made This Way today by calling 1-888-291-8000 or logging onto the shop at Catholic.com.
maybe you're not a Christian person. Maybe you're a free thinker or skeptic or atheist, and you'd like to challenge us on the historicity of the Gospels, on the reliability of the Gospels. You're welcome to call too. Anybody's welcome to call 888-318-7884, or perhaps you are, as our previous caller, a Christian person who believes the faith, but has certain questions about how it all fits together. This idea that the Gospels are historically reliable. 888-318-7884 is the number. Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest. Father is a Norbertine priest from St. Michael's Abbey, just north of us, and a regular guest here on Catholic Answers Live. We get the delight of having him in studio with us today, however, which we don't usually get. And we were talking before about someone's making a point and you focus on something that is not part of the point. And apparently you said when you were talking about the... I didn't even catch
7 days of creation.
We said the sun goes around the earth.
What I said was, I think if I can reproduce exactly, I said, when
we have tape on this, by the way.
In the first 3 days, it could not have possibly indicated that it was 3 revolutions of the sun around the earth.
Yeah.
Right? I was denying that. I wasn't asserting that some sort of geocentric theory of things. In fact, the very point I was making was that the scriptures aren't telling us primarily astronomical facts, right?
Yes.
So,
so you're not geocentric.
Certainly, the scriptures, they'll talk about the sun going around the earth when they're talking about just how things appear to us, which we even talk about. The sun rose in the morning; it set in the evening,
right?
And that doesn't make us geocentrists either.
No,
right?
No.
Now, who knows where the very center of the universe is? I don't know that anyone knows that. So
I know where it is.
I'm not even...
It's right here, sitting next to you.
Well, yeah, we all tend to make ourselves the center of the universe. It's true, but wherever God wants the center of the universe to be, fine. Who knows where it is? But I'm neither affirming nor denying. But if I'm talking about science, I'm perfectly happy to say the sun's going around the earth is going around the sun and so forth. So
888-318-7884. Again, the number. Stephen in Dallas, Texas is next. Stephen's listening on the EWTN app. Stephen, your question for Father Sebastian Walsh.
Hi, Father. I have a question
Stephen.
relating to the sacrament of baptism.
Yes.
So, as we understand as Catholics, that the sacraments are instituted by Christ, and we also baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yes.
So my question is, what was baptism before John the Baptist baptized Jesus? It seems like in the scripture it was at least known, or baptism had a meaning. I'm trying to figure out what was it kind of known as colloquially. I can't pronounce that word, before Christ instituted that sacrament.
That's a very good question. Yeah. So baptism was known in the scriptures certainly before Christ. The idea of pouring water over someone in a kind of a pseudo-sacramental way was something that was known obviously by John the Baptist, and apparently even before that, if you look at some of the historical evidences. And so it's important to see that the scriptures characterize John's baptism as a baptism of repentance from sin. Okay? It was not the same baptism which Jesus himself gave to his apostles. It wasn't baptism in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Rather, it was baptism as a form of preparation for the coming of Christ. And so it didn't have the status of a full sacrament. A sacrament, if you get your good, Baltimore Catechism out, says a sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to communicate or to give grace. And there's only 7 sacraments in that sense of the word, and the baptism of John was not one of those. But it was like a proto-sacrament, a kind of a pre-sacrament. Another interesting example of that is marriage, which was instituted by God at the beginning, but it was natural marriage. It was not yet a sacrament because Christ had not yet instituted it as a sign of the union between Christ and the church. And therefore, marriage in the Old Testament had a kind of pseudo-sacramental purpose, but it wasn't a full sacrament. The Old Testament signs that they used, for example, circumcision, the sacrifices of Paschal Lamb, things like that, were all pseudo-sacramental in nature, not insofar as they infallibly communicated grace. We say in Catholic theology, ex opere operato, means by the very fact that they're done, as long as you're not resisting, they're going to give you grace. The Old Testament sacraments, the baptism of John, all that required faith interiorly on the part of the person and a consent and a belief in the significance of it. And so none of those were sacraments in the full sense. So John was doing a kind of a preparation for baptism. Now, if you want to have a really detailed understanding of the relationship between John's baptism and the baptism of Christ, go to the Summa Theologiae of St. Thomas Aquinas. You can go online. I think one place is newadvent.com is a place that has the Summa of St. Thomas. And he has a section on the baptism of Jesus by St. John. It's in the third part of the Summa. Boy, I want to say it's somewhere around question 35, somewhere around there.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I'm throwing it off the top of my head. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, there, St. Thomas addresses the many reasons why there was this preparation in John's baptism and the way in which John's baptism was a preparation for the baptism of Christ. But the short answer to your question is, no sacraments existed before Christ. They were all instituted by Christ. But there were preparations that were certain likenesses and imperfect preparations for the sacraments of Christ earlier on. John's baptism was one of them.
How's that, Stephen?
That is awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you very much for the call. The Gospels are reliable. You can trust them. They tell the truth all the way through. Not one line of them does anything but tell the truth. That's what we would assert as Catholic Christians. And if you've got a question about that, why we have such confidence that the Gospels are reliable, you are welcome to call today, 888-318-7884. You're welcome to call whether you're Catholic, Christian, not Christian. Anybody's welcome to call with a question about the reliability of the Gospels, 888-318-7884. We go now to Dan in Missouri, listening on Covenant Radio. Dan, your question for Father Sebastian Walsh.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, Father Walsh.
Sure.
My question is this. Is there any information on Jesus, about his life and so forth, outside of the Gospels, like a letter from a Roman official to his boss?
Yes.
Saying that there's a guy named Jesus and he does this, should I do something?
Yes.
Is there any information like that?
There is, in fact. In fact, there's a fairly abundant amount of information. The two perhaps most famous sources are the Roman historian Tacitus, the Annals of Imperial Rome, which is one of the most famous works of all of history. In there, he mentions Christ, and it had to do with a letter that Trajan wrote to a local official. I don't remember all the exact details, but in any case, Tacitus mentions it. In the Penguin edition, I still remember, it's page 356 in the Penguin edition. I don't know why I remember that, but there you go. You could find the reference to Christ there. We read it at Thomas Aquinas College. Another place that's more abundant is the historian, the Jewish/Roman historian Flavius Josephus, who on several occasions referred to Christ, and in fact, he also referred to many of the apostles, including James, the brother of the Lord, in his works. But I think I've seen different compilations of different extra-biblical texts that refer to Christ from the first 2 or 3 centuries, including, say, the Talmud, and anti-Christian texts and so forth. I think that there was more than 60 different texts that I saw in that compilation. Gosh, I wish I could remember the name. There was a book years ago. It's called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It was by a Protestant attorney. Josh was his name. Josh. Anyway, it's a long time ago. Josh McDowell. That's it. Evidence Demands a Verdict, and he. We have a visitor in the office who we have to thank for that last name. Thank you. He's a
military chaplain.
A chaplain for the Navy there. So we're working. It's a very ecumenical experience right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, Josh McDowell wrote this book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and I think there he has a compilation of at least 50 extra biblical sources of historical evidence that Christ existed and was, and they're relatively contemporary to Christ's time.
How's that? Okay, Dan?
I wrote that down then. Yeah, that's Evidence Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell.
Yeah, that's
okay,
right.
I wrote that down. Good.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, and thank you for your help, and keep up the good work.
Sure, my pleasure.
Again, 888-318-7884 is our number. Father Sebastian Walsh, our guest this hour. We're talking about the reliability of the Gospels. If you've got some doubts about whether the Gospels are entirely reliable, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. If you don't have doubts, but you just like some help explaining an objection perhaps that you've heard to the reliability of the Gospels, 888-318-7884. And today we cannot do our work here at Catholic Answers without Protestant chaplains being in the studio to help us out. So thank you, chaplain. I have a couple things I wanted to share with you, and I've forgotten to get to them so far. So before we take a break, I'll just remind you that we have the brand new ebook, The Catholic Answers Guide to Navigating the Bible. It's connected to the release of Jimmy's brand new book, Jimmy Akin's brand new book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. It's got some excerpts from that and a bunch of other really good stuff. So just go over to shop.catholic.com, look for the free ebook banner, shop.catholic.com, look for the free ebook banner, click that banner, and you'll get your own copy of the free ebook, The Catholic Answers Guide to Navigating the Bible. And don't forget about getting Jimmy's book, The Bible is a Catholic Book. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on whether the Gospels are reliable with our guest, Father Sebastian Walsh.
This is Bishop Chad Zielinski from the Diocese of Fairbanks of Northern Alaska, and you are listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Have you ever heard of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Angelicum in Rome? It's the Roman alma mater of none other than John Paul II and the soon-to-be beatified Venerable Fulton J. Sheen. Our university is not only a place of study, the Angelicum is the only pontifical university in Rome which offers all-day Eucharistic adoration for our 1,000 students, 200 professors, and 63 friars, a practice that has continued uninterrupted since 2002. This is Father Benedict Kroll, the Director of Mission Advancement for the Angelicum in Rome. Learn more at angelicum.it.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Don't forget, second hour, Trent Horn will be here. It's always fun to finish up the week with Trent. We have a good time, but this time we got some serious stuff to talk about. And you're welcome to offer issues if you like. We're talking about the church in the world. I'm sure we'll talk about the Pope in Africa, and we'll talk about, I don't want to just keep picking on the Pope, but we'll probably also talk about the Pope getting stuck in an elevator. I don't think you can go through the week in Catholic news without covering that. That's a good story. I rescued the Pope from an elevator, the guy who did that. He's got that for the rest of his life. 888-318-7884 is the number. This hour, we're talking with our good friend, Father Sebastian Walsh, a Norbertine priest, about the reliability of the Gospels. If you have doubts about the reliability of the Gospels, or maybe you don't have doubts, maybe you're convinced that the Gospels are not reliable, or if you just like some help answering objections to the Gospels, 888-318-7884 is the number, 888-318-7884. Up next is Esther, right here in California, listening to EWTN on Sirius XM Satellite Radio, Channel 130. Esther, your question for Father.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for taking the call. My question is, I have a 25-year-old daughter, and literally just the other day we were talking, and she asked me about the Bible and its validity, and how do we really know that these things happened, and, what about dinosaurs and all these other things that are not mentioned in the Bible, and so how do we really know? And I just felt terrible because I didn't have a great answer for her.
Oh, good. Okay, well, let me give you a few things that I think will help. There's really two different questions you need to answer. One has to do with whether or not the things recorded in the Bible really happen. The other question has to do with is the text that we have of the Bible, in fact, reliably the text that was written by the original authors?
Right.
So I want to talk about both of those. Let me talk about the second one first. There is no text, ancient text, that we have in our possession which has more evidence and textual evidence than the Scriptures, the Holy Scriptures. We have more than 25,000 ancient manuscripts of the Bible or parts of the Bible. And nothing else even comes close from the standpoint of the number of texts we have. And the striking thing about those texts is that while there are, for the most part, minor differences, one preposition gets changed for another or whatever else, and small spelling differences, that the substance of the text there is right on. And so we have tremendous certitude that the text that we have in the Bible is, if not identical to, very close to the text that was originally authored by the sacred authors. And that especially falls true about the Gospels more than any of the other texts.
Could I just give an example of a similar document, Caesar's letters from the Gaul campaign?
Yes.
These are accepted as history, and the earliest copy we have, and it's only one copy, comes from the 8th century.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
almost a millennia after.
Right, and
it was
it's
written,
accepted as completely valid.
Yeah.
Really written by Caesar.
Right, but as I said, we have literally 25,000 at least partial copies of passages of the Bible throughout, and they do nothing but support each other and validate each other. So we have a very high certitude that the texts of Scripture are in fact the texts that were written by those first authors. Then, going back to the first question, how do I know those things really happened? Well, there's different ways to find out that. First of all, we have to ask ourselves a question: is the text itself asserting that the event happened? Right? For example, there's parables in the gospel. There's a parable of the Good Samaritan, and we don't think that the Good Samaritan was a real individual who walked around from Jerusalem to Jericho and found a man lying half dead, because it was given in the form of a parable. So not everything in the Scriptures is meant to be read as if it were an historical account. And so that's one thing to be aware of. And sometimes people say, oh, this didn't happen, and yet you treated it as history. Well, that's only because you were misreading the text and assuming it was historical. So make sure you look at the kind of text it is, like a parable, and then you say, okay, if it's a parable, then that's probably not history. On the other hand, when it talks about Jesus' crucifixion, his resurrection, his birth, those are historical events. So that's the first thing to distinguish. Then there's an abundance of archaeological evidence that supports especially the things written in the Gospels, but also many, many things that are written in the Old Testament. It seems like every other day you read a news story about some new archaeological piece of evidence that confirms this or that verse of the Old Testament Bible from the book of Kings or the book of Judges or something like that. It's remarkable. And there are resources for those things, the different archaeological pieces of evidence that indicate that the passages were accurate. Simply visiting the Holy Land is actually helpful, because I recently did a few months ago a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And the Holy Land is laid out and described the way it is in the Scriptures. So that's evidence that the people who wrote the Scriptures lived there in the Holy Land and were intending to tell us about the things that happened, in fact, in that place. If they were sort of made up, you would expect them to have all sorts of mistakes in them. So those are a few things. There are many, many, I think, good books you could recommend with regard to the different evidences, archaeological and otherwise, of the reliability of the Scriptures. And maybe you could look into one of those. I don't know if you had one on that you thought was a particularly good book. Or I
was going to say we could maybe send her a copy of Jimmy Akin's DVD. You Can Trust the Gospels.
Yeah, that's great.
That one? Okay, Darren says yes, we can. Esther, is that helpful to you?
Yeah, no, that would be awesome. And I think, too, maybe the Shroud of Turin, looking more into that, would that be...
yeah, that's helpful. There's, I think Father Robert Spitzer wrote a book that has a whole analysis of the Shroud of Turin in it that has some nice stuff. There's a lot of evidence there, too, that's wonderful evidence for the details of Christ's passion in particular. Now, that won't tell you about the Old Testament and the rest of the Bible, but hey, each piece of evidence that when you're able to say, hey, this corresponds in a very distinct way to what's written in the Scriptures, is one more piece of evidence to help someone who doesn't yet have faith believe that the Scriptures are reliable and valid.
Actually, the name of the DVD set is Why You Can Trust the Gospels from Jimmy Akin. Esther, if you hang on the line, don't go anywhere, then Marie will get your information and we'll send you a copy of that DVD. Maybe watch it with with your daughter. Father Sebastian Walsh, our guest, we're talking about the reliability of the Gospels. Ryan in Boise, Idaho is next. Ryan's listening on Salt and Light Radio. Ryan, your question for Father.
So I'll let you know afterwards how it went.
Oh, hey, Ryan, are you there with us? All right, we're gonna come back to Ryan in just 1 second. That's all gonna work out. Ryan forgot. Again, Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest. 888-31-TRUTH is our number. And I imagine if you dial now, we'll still be able to get, once we have our conversation with Ryan, 1 or 2 callers in before the end of the show. So you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Ryan, you there with us? Oh, what's up, Ryan? All right. This is the question that I have from Ryan.
Okay.
So I'm going to give it to you, and
sure.
then we'll check back with Ryan and see if the question was exactly what he wanted to ask. How do you understand and answer for the different accounts of the crucifixion?
Great. That's a great question. If you look at the different accounts of the crucifixion in the Scriptures, what's notable is not their lack of cohesion or the fact that they contradict each other or anything like that. What's notable is that some say or give accounts that others leave out, right? Remember I mentioned that before, that when you're looking at the Gospels, the sacred authors intentionally omit some things and they want to really focus in on others, right? So take, for example, Luke's account. If you look at Luke's account of the crucifixion, you have Jesus from the cross very clearly undergoing in reverse order the same 3 temptations that he underwent when he was in the desert. In the first case, you have the high priest saying, "If you are the Son of God, come down from that cross." Those are the priests, right? The high priest there. Remember, the last temptation in Luke was to be made high priest, to come down from the parapet of the temple. Then the next one are the soldiers saying, "If you're the king, come down from the cross." Remember, the second temptation in Luke is to be made king. And then the third temptation from the cross is, if you are the Son of God, then save yourself and us from the bad thief, right? And that's like the temptation to turn stones into bread to save his own bodily life by performing a miracle, And so it's substantially the same 3 temptations happening in reverse order. And so St. Luke obviously wants to record those in order for you to see the significance, the spiritual significance of those temptations. That there you have Jesus being tempted once again in the ultimate moment of his life and then passing that temptation. And that makes sense out of what Luke said earlier in the Scripture. Right after the devil tempted Jesus, it said that he left him for a time.
Right.
Implying he's coming back. Well, here's the moment when he comes back while Jesus is suffering even more deeply when he's hanging on the cross. So Luke had this theological aim, so he made sure to include those details, but he also excluded others. There are other accounts that talk more about the details of the nailing of the hands and the feet. Other details, like John specifically mentions the conversation between Christ and his mother. Now that account is easily explained because John alone of all the apostles was actually close enough at the foot of the cross to hear that conversation between Jesus and Mary, and he alone would have witnessed that part. So you can explain that aspect, or John including that, whereas the others excluded it. So.
Well, I'm sorry we weren't able to talk with Ryan, but I'm glad we got the question from you there, Ryan. I feel when you say these things that there's a certain confidence in what God has promised to each of us personally that comes from taking the Gospels not as just another religious text or as legends or something, but once you can really develop that confidence, this really happened as it's being described here. Jesus did and said these things. This is who he is. Then that makes a great deal of difference in my own life of having the confidence he really will raise me from the dead, for example, because that's a really big one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, there's prophecies contained in both Old and New Testament. And one of the things that can validate or verify the truth of the historicity of the Gospels is the fact that the prophecies made in very great distinction come true.
Yes.
Right?
So much so that sometimes the argument is made, they just wrote the Gospels to make it fit with all those prophecies that came before.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But even in our own time, we've seen some. Jesus says, for example, that in the end days that there'll be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. And what did we see at Fatima? Sign in the sun.
Right. Yes,
And,
indeed.
this is a very distinct prophecy that has come true, right? If Jesus didn't say those words, it's very surprising that exactly what he said was going to happen happened.
Indeed,
So
right.
We have other ways of verifying the truth of the historicity of the Gospels that we could ourselves verify.
Father, it's very, very helpful. It strikes me that that mother talking about the 25-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
Young people in particular have been taught don't trust this stuff.
Yeah.
We can explain it away now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I remember C.S. Lewis had a great little line. He said, "In our day and age, authority of every kind is called into question, except the authority of self."
Yeah, that's right. Father, it's been great to have you in the studio with us. May we have your blessing before we go?
Per intercessionem Beata Maria Virginis et omnem sanctorum benedictio Dei omnipotentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et mani et semper.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father.
You're welcome, Sai. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody who called. Well, we'll see you Monday, God willing, right here. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Marie. Oh, I forgot. We're not going to see you Monday. Trent's here. See you in a minute, Trent. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live right after this.
This is Bishop James Conley of the Diocese of Lincoln. Keep it right here on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Tim Staples, Director of Apologetics at Catholic Answers, and I'm here to tell you about a unique new way we've come up with to share the truth of the Catholic Church with young people. Let's face it, many young people today have strayed from the path of faith. How many parents and grandparents have had their hearts broken by seeing young people stop practicing their Catholic faith, join another religion, or even give up faith entirely, often falling into a life of sexual sin. To keep young people strong in their faith, we need to find new and innovative ways to reach them. And to help in that endeavor, Catholic Answers has just published a brand new science fiction graphic novel called The Big Picture that's especially designed to reach young people. The Big Picture features almost 200 pages of full-color illustrations and a storyline that's easy to follow as our heroes come face to face with the drama and mystery of God's plan for the salvation of the world. Order your copy of The Big Picture today by calling 1-888-291-8000. That's 1-888-291-8000, or by visiting the shop at Catholic.com or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The Islamic State, Boko Haram, Radical Islam, Sharia law. The truth is, we hear about Islam in the news every day, and many people, even some of our political leaders, would have you believe that at its core, Islam is a religion of peace. But is it? Are Muslim beliefs really so different than our own? In his riveting bestseller, Not Peace But a Sword, New York Times best-selling author Robert Spencer shines the light of truth on Islamic doctrine and beliefs, and reveals that there are differences that bear examination, and warns that if we ignore these differences, we do so at our own peril. Order your copy of Not Peace But a Sword by calling 1-888-291-8000, visiting Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson's masterpiece, Lord of the World, is, in a word, prophetic. Originally published in 1907, it depicts a world where relativism has triumphed over objectivity, a world where, in the name of tolerance, religious doctrine is not tolerated. It is a world where euthanasia is practiced widely and religion hardly practiced at all. The lord of this nightmare world is a benign-looking politician intent on power in the name of peace and intent on the destruction of religion in the name of truth. Author Dale Alquist said it best: whether or not Monsignor Benson's picture of our future is accurate, the fact is his picture of our present is chillingly accurate. Recommended by Pope Benedict XVI and by Pope Francis, Lord of the World is a must-read. It's also the latest release in the Catholic Answers Classics series. Order your copy of Lord of the World now by calling 1-888-291-8000 or by visiting Catholic.com or by asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Who or what is God? Does the universe provide clues to God's existence? Why would a loving, all-powerful God permit suffering in the world? In 20 Answers, God, you'll find smart, solid answers to these questions and many more, all while it guides you down a path of rational inquiry and understanding towards an encounter with the central mystery of the universe. 20 Answers God is part of the 20 Answers series from Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the Church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com today and take a look at this exciting new series from Catholic Answers Press.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Tried to sign off before Trent got here, but it didn't work. I made it in the studio before I signed off for the week. Hello, Trent Horn.
I made it in just under the wire. You can't keep me out like that, Kellett. You're gonna have to be quicker than that.
Trent Horn is an apologist here at Catholic Answers, prolific writer. Among his books, Why We're Catholic and Persuasive Pro-Life, and most recently, at least I think it's most recently. You never know. You turn around and Trent's got a new book out, but I think Counterfeit Christ is the most recent book to come out from you, Mr. Trent Horn.
It's the most recent book to be published, but I did finish another book, so I've sent that one off to the press. And that one I'm co-authoring with Catherine Pekalik, who is an associate.
Oh, this is I'm looking forward to reading this.
Yes, I co-author with her. She is an associate professor of economics at the Catholic University of America. The book is Why Catholics Can't Be Socialists.
Yeah,
Church's teaching is clear on this. In the past 150 years, over 8 major encyclicals, very clear Catholics cannot be socialists. And we're not going to take questions about that here in the episode, though it may come up organically. But a lot of people think, oh, you can be a Catholic socialist, or what about democratic socialism? We answer all those questions in our book. That will be available probably early spring.
But you don't tell people they have to be capitalists then, do you? Because you don't have to be a capitalist.
It is a permitted belief in the Church's teachings.
But sometimes it gets said that way. I think you and I might be slightly different on this.
We might,
I think I'm ahead of you, is what I'm saying.
Ahead of me?
Yeah. No, but I think you're more, and I know people are not going to like me saying this, but I have greater reservations about capitalism as a term and as a practice than you have.
Sure. There are different attitudes that people have towards free markets and capitalism. When we talk about this in the book, we have a whole section. So the first section, 2 sections, are on socialism, its historical development, and what the papacy has said about, what the Church has said about socialism, going from Leo XIII, Pope Pius XI, Pope John XXIII, all the way up to Pope St. John Paul II. And even to Pope Francis, who condemned the Marxist ideology. We also have a section, though, after that, is capitalism the answer? And so we say, well, what does the Church teach about capitalism?
Yeah.
And the Church, however, teaches that capitalism and socialism are very different. Capitalism, in principle, is not wrong, though it can be abused.
Okay.
But socialism, in principle, is wrong. And we go into that in great detail in the book. Why? And then there's a broad range of opinions that people can have towards capitalism. I would say that I'm very optimistic about the use of free markets and capitalism to improve human flourishing, to reduce poverty. I'm very optimistic about that. There's other Catholics who are a bit more pessimistic towards that. And there's some Catholics who embrace another form of economics that they would call distributism.
Yeah.
So that's something
where everybody gets a cow. Well, that's not exactly what it is. But
you get 3 cows.
You get 3 cows?
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought you got 3 cows and some land.
I'm just being fresh. I don't want to offend anybody because it's a perfectly legitimate.
No,
and
there's
good,
there's nothing wrong. And Catholics
right.
can reasonably disagree about the merits of either capitalism or distributism. Distributism was pioneered. It's basically called the Chesterton-Belloc thesis. So it was pioneered by G.K. Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc. Belloc's most in-depth treatment would be the servile state. And so, of course, well, I'm sure I'll be talking about that a lot, next spring when the book comes out.
And the servile state is good.
Yeah,
it's
there's a great debate that you can watch online, actually. It was put out by the Acton Institute. It's a debate between Jay Richards, who wrote a book on defending capitalism, and Joseph Pierce, who is a defender of distributism. So, and Father Robert Sirico is the moderator, though he gets in a few more arguments for capitalism. It's almost like 2-on-1 a little bit with Pierce, but it's a great debate nonetheless. So
I didn't know Joseph Pierce was a distributist.
Oh yeah,
another reason to like him. Yeah, he's such a fine. I mean, I don't think I'm a distributist, but I do really appreciate many of the things. I'm also of the mind that a lot of times medieval economics is denigrated by modern people who think we invented everything good. And there's a lot of good things in medieval economics. It's not all bad.
I have to admit, I do enjoy when I go to Renaissance festivals that they have far more turkey legs and jousting that I'll see at modern capitalist
turkey legs
association.
were crazy in the Middle Ages. Turkey legs everywhere. Turkey legs for days.
I want 3 cows, a turkey leg, and a jousting tournament every other Friday. If you could give me that, Si, I would go down your path. So that'll come out in spring, and that'll be Why Catholics Can't Be Socialists, with some commentary on capitalism. But we utter what the church teaches. The church teaches capitalism is not intrinsically wrong like socialism,
right,
though it can be abused, and there's certain juridical restraints and frameworks that are necessary for it to protect the individual. So we go on that at length in the book, and hopefully Catherine will come out. Maybe we could do a dual panel show and talk about that in spring when the book's available.
Our number 888-318-7884. If there are news items or aspects of the current state of the church internally or in the world, you're welcome to call. It's the Church in the World today, this hour, with Trent Horn. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. I wanted to raise, I got a story I want to go to.
Okay.
Because it's a total pet peeve of mine. And I'm not the only one who has it. I'm not claiming it, but it just drives me crazy when people talk in these terms.
Okay.
And it seemed to me that, and I watched some of this, the CNN kind of conversations they had on global warming or climate change, whatever, climate crisis, whatever you're supposed to say now.
Yes. It was like 7 hours, right?
Yeah, I couldn't watch the whole thing. I don't think anybody. I mean, can you watch? I couldn't watch 7 hours of the Avengers if you gave that. Well, maybe I could. But the one bothered me.
That can solve your climate crisis. Just snap your fingers and get rid of half the people. Actually, it would. We can talk about
here's
that.
My problem. This is the Thanos solution, and I think that's what Bernie Sanders was promoting. And
right.
It drives me
You're talking
crazy.
about his comments related to population control.
Abortion and population control, and the apparent embrace of the idea that what we really need is fewer people. This is mind-boggling to me that an intelligent person would say that.
And this is something that even Pope Francis has condemned in his encyclical Laudato Si.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say, well, Laudato Si is the climate change encyclical. No, it's not. It does mention it, but it's about our care and stewardship responsibilities we have to the earth. And it mentions the science surrounding climate change, though it doesn't take definitive positions on those issues. It just says that humans have responsibilities towards the environment, but it does specifically condemn the idea that in order to protect the environment, we have to engage in population control, we have to denigrate the human person.
Right.
And that's a complete wrong-headed way of looking at it, and it's something that has been peddled ever since really the 1960s. Before that, you had in the 19th century, Thomas Malthus was a clergyman who proposed the Malthusian catastrophe theory.
Yeah.
And Malthus basically said, look, food production is arithmetic. This is how we're growing in food production.
Right.
It's 19th century England. We're doing okay, but not great. Population is geometric or even exponential. You know, we're having way too many people, and we don't have enough food. So nature's fiercest check, he described it, for stability is famine. That nature uses famine to restore order, and that's what's going to happen because there's too many people. And so people think, well, we got to either increase food production or decrease people.
By the way, this is why economics is called the dismal science.
Yes, that's another term for it, though I think my co-author would chafe at the idea of calling it that. Economics is the science of managing everyday wants. Everyday wants, and it is about satisfying unlimited wants for finite resources. And that's the problem. Finite food, what do? People usually, and this is in the 1960s, there was the same thing with Paul Ehrlich. Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb. And what's amazing to me is that these people never lose credibility even if they're demonstrably proven wrong. So Ehrlich wrote in the 1960s, The Population Bomb. He opens the book by saying, the battle to feed humanity is over. Millions will perish from famines. We are past the point of no return. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Yet he's still taken seriously in many circles, even though all his predictions in the 1960s and 70s were wrong. He was wrong about he believed that that major commodities would become more expensive by the year 2000 because they would become more scarce. And another economist, Nigel, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, wagered with him saying, no, those 10 commodities will get cheaper because we'll get more efficient at creating them. And he was right. They became cheaper, not more expensive. And so
because people are creative. I don't know if you know this.
People are the answer. When we are dealing with when we're dealing with issues and problems, we shouldn't think we got to keep people out by using contraception, abortion.
No, that to me is like saying the birthday presents would be way better if we didn't have the person with the birthday here to open them and ruin them. Like that makes no sense. God gave this world and this universe to people, and people certainly have to take care of it. But what is the point of a birthday party if there's no one at the birthday party?
Right. And so
that was lame. Was that a little bit lame? Yeah, Darren's looking at me like that was a lame analogy. But
now I want birthday cake. We have a birthday cake here at Catholic Answers like every 2 weeks, it feels like.
I want birthday cake too.
So I just want some sheet
stay
cake
on
right
focus here.
I'm focused.
Okay, yeah.
There's not enough cake. So we've got to kill off. We have to kill off the people at the party. No, and what it makes
plenty of turkey legs, but not enough cake.
I'm looking, and obviously as Catholics, we can reasonably disagree about non-intrinsically evil methods to combat climate change and the environment, and about the effects that human activity has on climate. But I do think it's something that we should take seriously, but we should not endorse. What amazed me at the town hall, so I'm going to add a little bit of my prudential judgment here. It's not, just my thoughts on this, which I think is fair. That you see at this town hall, people are saying, especially Bernie Sanders will say, oh, well, we need to use contraception and abortion. We need population control, especially in poorer countries, which is kind of eugenic and colonialism.
Oh, please. It's less brown-skinned people. I was looking at this thing in Newsweek magazine recently. It was on overpopulation, and they had a picture, and every single face in the picture, it was hundreds of people, was browns again. There was not one white person in there. It's blatantly racist, all this population. I'm sorry, that's not your view. That's not the church's view. That's my view.
Well, I think actually, there's a book published by Ignatius Press called Target Africa, that talks about this kind of neo-colonialism of imposing Western values, which people accuse the church of doing all the time.
Yeah.
But imposing values of contraception and abortion on these individuals. So my prudential judgment, what I'm amazed is you have someone who will promote this, but not a very simple solution. On my podcast at TrentHornPodcast.com, I talk about, on Fridays, I have just random topics. On one of them, I talked about nuclear power. I believe the easiest way to help decrease carbon emissions, make the world safer, cleaner, and save lives is to build more nuclear power plants. It gets us away from dirty energy that kills people. People worry about, they watched Chernobyl on HBO, which is scary to watch. But that's like saying, I'm never going to go on a cruise again because I watched Titanic. We have learned from that. The reactor used at Chernobyl has never been manufactured to be used ever outside of the Soviet Union. It was a horrible design. But now you have places like France. France derives 70% of its energy from nuclear power.
Yes, right.
And it's safe. Whereas now you worry about, what about nuclear accidents or deaths? The fact of the matter is, around the world, people who are using coal, brown coal, oil, that kills millions of people a year because of the pollutants that get in the air and get in people's lungs. But nobody thinks about that. So for me...
No, we're going to get rid of people first.
Yeah, people are the problem. Instead, let's try for innovation. And so I feel like almost when I hear people talk about the environment, but they are not in favor of nuclear energy, and so you say, what about nuclear waste? What about accidents? I talk about that in the podcast. You can go to TrentHornPodcast.com to hear my answers to that. I almost feel like it's like kind of like a religious opposition. It's like a purity thing. Like, why I can't be for this kind of stuff. And so but that's irrational. That we can come up with rational solutions that promote human good and human flourishing without relying on intrinsic evils or the exploitation of people to do so. We should be able to do it, and we should have a conversation about that.
Thanks. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I'm just looking for a presidential candidate who will say into the camera, babies are good. It's up to moms and dads to regulate the births of babies. It is not up to the government to get involved in the baby business. That's the candidate I'm looking for.
Yeah, I like the idea of let's... actually, I have a book in my office by Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse called It Takes a Family to Raise a Village.
Oh, I see what she did there.
Yeah, she's good. It's a great book.
We'll be right back with more with Trent Horn, Church in the World. Tons of people want to talk to you about the church currently in the news on various things. We'll get to those calls as soon as we come back right here on Catholic Answers Live.
Got questions? Visit us today at Catholic.com.
Catholic Answers Live is proudly supported by CatholicChemistry.com, a new dating site for Catholics who want to do dating right and believe relationships start with Catholic chemistry. Catholic Answers Live thanks CatholicChemistry.com for their generous support on the web at CatholicChemistry.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Listeners to Catholic radio, I think, benefit most, at least initially, from what I call remedial catechesis. What Catholic radio does is it becomes an echo chamber for the teaching authority of the Catholic Church. And what we're doing is teaching many things which have been neglected over the last 40, 50 years. If you listen to Catholic radio, you know what the Catholic Church teaches.
Al Cresta thinks Catholic radio is important. So should you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we try to have a little bit of fun on Fridays, and it's always fun when Trent Horn is here, and it's always fun when we get Trent talking. I don't know why I get mad about stuff when Trent's here, but we're talking about church in the world. If you've got questions in that regard, if you got an issue you want to raise, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. I got a bunch more stories I wanted to go through, but there's a ton of callers. What do you want to do?
Let's take a few callers, but then I like to get to some of these other stories because I think I lit a fire under a few people, and I'm happy to address their questions.
With the socialism thing?
Who would have thought, right?
Yeah. Okay. Al in Marcellus, New York, watching on YouTube Live. You are up first. Al, your question for Trent Horn.
Yes. My question is, I want to get Trent's take on why there is such a fixation with the Catholic Church in the media. Since, supposedly we live in a post-Christian era and we always hear talk about the nuns.
Right.
So one example I had in mind, and I know you talked about a little bit about this in your podcast, is the whole Harry Potter story, the banned books. It just seems odd to me that, for a grade school, I think the student body there is like maybe 350 kids.
Yeah.
Why, you'd have these...
Why is that big news?
National outlets carrying this story in the first place, so just kind of to get your take on this.
Sure. And actually, I was hoping to talk about that a little bit with Cy, because I actually just did 2 podcasts on that controversy. One where I briefly discussed the news item in Tennessee. The principal at the school has banned Harry Potter in the library. Students can bring the book from home, but at the advice of some exorcists, he banned the book, worried that it contributed poor morals to the students and could contain real spells that were hazardous to their health. And then some people sent me a video from a prominent exorcist talking about why Harry Potter is spiritually dangerous. I actually listened to that video, though I found in that video many statements that were unsubstantiated or actually inaccurate or false. And so I addressed those actually on my podcast. My most recent episode was on Thursday. If you want to check that out, go to TrentHornPodcast.com and you can scroll down and see the episodes on Harry Potter to get my take on it. And if we can get back to Harry Potter here, we got other questions. I'm happy to share my thoughts on the matter because Catholics are divided about this particular issue. The church does not have an official teaching on this particular book or its permissibility to read among Catholics. And Catholics are divided about whether it's suitable or unsuitable. Though, Al, I will say that I think a lot of news outlets go after the church because they want to stoke a culture war between Christians and non-Christians. And the Catholic Church is just such a large, visible, organized, symbolic representation of Christianity, more so than really any other, church or denomination that exists. Also, I think that many people in media who might have a fixation on the Catholic Church, odds are they're non-practicing Catholics themselves. They have a background to this. I think there's statistics say that 1 in every 10 people in the country is a non-practicing Catholic. So I wouldn't be surprised that many people, especially back east and in media and academia, you always hear somebody say, well, I went to Catholic school, so I know.
Yeah.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard someone say, well, I went to Catholic school, we would never have to do a pledge drive again for Catholic Answers Live. The amount of times I've heard that. So I think that might be one of the, probably the primary reasons, just a symbolic representation of Christianity. It's a foil to perpetuate the tropes of the ideas that, well, faith and reason are opposed. Christians have these agendas. Yep. And then, but even the Harry Potter one, though, I'll say that I do think it can be newsworthy because Harry Potter is just a very famous book, and many people, who would never imagine banning a book, that it's kind of a man bites dog sort of story. Like, wait, what is this? Like, it's, similar stories you'll find all over the news that are surprising or shocking, and that's a shocking thing to many people. And it also confirms prejudices in them that Christians are unreasonable, and that's where Catholics can disagree and have a discussion about whether these particular books are suitable or not suitable. My opinion, after looking at the matter, is it's up to individuals to use their prudential judgment. If you feel like this book is something that can encourage you to engage in occult activity, you shouldn't read it. But on the whole, I consider it fantasy literature, and its depictions of magic are on par with depictions you would see in Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and in other fantasy works. And so I have not been convinced of evidence that the Harry Potter books contain real spells. The evidence that has been put forward to me that they are real spells is, to me, severely lacking. In fact, I looked at a list of the spells, and they're just Latin words. They're just Latin words, or they're corrupted Latin words that refer to, if you're doing a spell about water or the head, it has agua or calvaria in it. It's, they're not. So that's, and then you can hear more about that on my podcast. But for me, I think that it's not universally or categorically unsuitable. It's up to people's individual judgment. But thanks for calling in.
Al, thank you very, very much. We're talking about the church in the world today with Trent Horn. You're welcome to call on anything that fits in with that topic of the church in the world. If it's going on in the world and you think the church has a take on it, or if there's commentary being made about the church out there, 888-318-7884. Let's go to Josh in Columbia, Maryland. You are up next, Josh. Your question for Trent Horn.
Hey, Trent, how you doing? So,
howdy, Josh.
I noticed earlier you said that Catholic cannot be socialist.
Right.
My question is I've noticed news articles stating that the Pope has affirmed socialism, like places from like the Forbes or New York Times.
Right.
Are these articles like incorrect, or are they just really biased? I know newspapers are not always the most accurate piece of literature in the world.
Yeah, they're not accurate. And also the problem is that in our discourse, especially the word socialist or socialism is very malleable. It has a lot of different meanings to people, many of them being incorrect. So you'll have people who say that any government involvement in the economy, so any government entitlement program like Social Security or Medicaid or food stamps or public schooling, that is full-blown socialism, and it's no different than the socialism in the Soviet Union. And that's not the case. What Catherine and I argue in our book is that socialism versus capitalism exists on a spectrum. And the question is, the means of production, the means of producing goods and services, are those things, do they belong to private enterprise primarily or government primarily? In a socialist economy, they'll say that the community as a whole owns these things, but usually it's government and government bureaucrats who own the vast majority of the means of production. So when you look at classically socialist countries like the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and to a great extent today, Venezuela would be another prime example. Government owns the vast majority of industries. They own them, and so they produce goods. Or Cuba is another good example of this. There's no private or free market for people to freely exchange goods and services with one another. Government just produces goods and then allocates them based on need. And as we show in our book, that is antithetical to the nature of the human person, the right to private property that Pope Leo XIII expresses in Rerum Novarum. So when Pope Francis, for example, is critical of capitalism, which is fine because Adam Smith, the founder of economics that many people associate with capitalism, he himself was very critical of free markets and how business leaders could exploit people. Hayek, for example, F.A. Hayek was a fierce critic of socialism, but he also recognized some of the tragic elements in capitalism. That it's a fallacy to say that any government involvement in the economy is full-blown socialism. That's not the case. So some people will take Pope Francis's endorsement of government entitlement programs or his criticism of the excesses of free markets, which are valid criticisms, and say, oh, well, he's a socialist. But he assuredly is not. And in the book, we talk about how Pope Francis, in his 2016 trip to the United States in front of Congress, the Pope actually defended the role of private businesses and how, if that's operated ethically, it can produce wealth and human flourishing for people. So definitely, you have to check out the book for the full explanation, but is that helpful for now?
Yeah, so what's the book called again?
The book will be called, at least it's tentatively now called, Why Catholics Can't Be Socialists. But just to summarize quickly, Pope Francis and other popes, Pope St. John Paul II, was critical of capitalism. There's a famous clause, or famous paragraphs in his encyclical Centissimus Annus, where he asks rhetorically, or figuratively, is capitalism the answer for third world poverty? And he says, well, it depends what you mean by capitalism. Yeah. If you mean by unrestrained capitalism that exploits people, no. If you mean a fair free market where people can exchange goods and services to grow wealth and grow businesses, yes. So, and you see these same kind of things in Pope Francis, but you don't see him endorsing full-fledged socialism by any means.
Again, 888-318-7884 is the number. Trent Horn is here on this Friday afternoon with us, and the church in the world is our topic. It doesn't have to be a news story that we have discussed, or it certainly doesn't have to be about socialism. You want to talk about Harry Potter or nuclear energy, you can do that. But anything else that is on the table right now as far as the church and the news and the world, you are welcome to call with your question. 888-318-7884. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more calls for Trent.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Have you subscribed to the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter? This is Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett, and I want to tell you about our new weekly newsletter full of behind-the-scenes information and facts you need to know about the show. It's easy to sign up. Just visit CatholicAnswersLive.com and look for the newsletter sign-up box on the front of the page. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the show and see what's coming in the days ahead, delivered weekly into your inbox. Sign up today for the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter and see what you've been missing. Go to CatholicAnswersLive.com.
Looking for an on-fire Catholic speaker for your event? Catholic Answers speakers will inform and inspire your audience to grow in their Catholic faith. For more information on booking a Catholic Answers speaker, visit CatholicAnswersSpeakers.com today.
In his new audio presentation, The Very First Fathers, apologist Jimmy Akin takes you on a tour of the earliest Christian writings outside the New Testament. From the most famous figures and most notable works to those lesser known but no less important, this pivotal time in the development of the early church is revealed in fascinating detail. Jimmy shows how, even in the first century after the resurrection, it was necessary to defend and explain truths that are still under attack today, such as the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and the perpetual virginity of Mary. The Very First Fathers is a compelling look at the dawn of the Christian age and edifying listening for anyone who wants to understand and defend the full truth of Catholicism. Order your copy of The Very First Fathers today by calling 1-888-291-8000, logging on to the shop at Catholic.com, or asking for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. It's the church in the world this hour. Trent Horn, our guest, 888-318-7884. Our number, 888-318-7884. If you've got a question about something going on in the world, especially as it relates to the Catholic faith, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Trent, there are more questions on socialism. We can go to them if you want, but I did want to ask you, because we're heading down to Australia pretty soon, a lot of us Catholic Answers folks.
That's right.
You heard this story about this Australian rugby player? Like, you can get fired for being Christian now?
Yes. So this was back in, I think, May of this year. Israel Folau was an Australian rugby player who posted, well, it's funny when you read news articles about this, because I was trying to bring it up for the discussion. I picked the first one from NBC News, and it just says, rugby player sacked after posting homophobic comments online.
It's just dirty pool.
But yeah, because then I look in the article, and yay, modern journalism, it doesn't have the comments. The story, like, what did he actually write?
No.
And it's not in the story. So then I have to go somewhere else. And basically, what Folau wrote was a paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, where Paul says, do not be deceived. There are those who will not inherit the kingdom of God. The porneia, those who engage in fornication, idolatria, the idolaters, adulterers, drunkards, revilers, carousers, greedy, thieves. And he uses two Greek words, arsenokoitai and malakoi, which refer to individuals who engage in same-sex behavior. And so Folau said, these people will go to hell, presumably if they don't believe in Jesus, or if you're one of these people, you'll be separated from God for all eternity. He said you'll go to hell. And so now that's considered, that's an attack on people.
On carousers.
Right. And it's funny. It's like, it's homophobic. It's like, well, what about being drunkophobic?
I don't actually know what a carouser is, but I probably should find that out.
Yeah, well, in the Bible, it's connected together. You'll notice in this passage, it's very interesting. The sins are often, they're connected. So the arsenokoitai and the malakoi are connected, the active and passive partners in same-sex behavior. Paul is clear. This is also an argument against the claim that you'll have revisionist theologians who say, well, Paul's only condemning pederasty. He was condemning man-boy love, not loving committed adult same-sex relationships, which doesn't work because, one, Paul could have used the Greek word paiderastes, and he doesn't. Instead, they'll say, well, those two individuals are men exploiting little boys.
Yeah.
To which I'll say, so Paul is saying the little boys are going to hell? Why doesn't he just say the arsenokoitai are going to hell? He also includes the malakoi. These two individuals are equal partners, along with those who engage in porneia and adultery. He's saying these sexual sins, these other sins against the body, drunkenness, greed, thievery. Carousing is just kind of like, drunken revelry would be a good way maybe to describe what carousing is.
Yeah.
That it's a warning, and it's an important one, that you're not going to be receptive to the good news of Jesus Christ unless you're fully aware and concerned about the bad news related to sin. That's something we miss a lot. And so what's funny is there's actually a reply from Peter Singer, who is Australian himself. I think he teaches at Princeton now, but he's Australian. He's probably one of the world's most famous philosophers. He sees nothing wrong with homosexual behavior. But he says this. He says, if Rugby Australia had existed in the first century of the Christian era, and Paul had enough talent to be a contracted player, Rugby Australia would presumably have ripped up his contract once his letter to the Corinthians became public.
Right.
And so he goes on to say that the thing is, for anyone outside this particular faith, it's hard to take such beliefs seriously. But try putting yourself in the position of someone with Folau's belief. You see people on a path toward a terrible fate, much worse than getting lung cancer, and they're blind to what awaits them. Wouldn't you want to warn them and give them the chance to avoid that awful fate? I assume that is what Folau believes he is doing.
Yeah.
And so it's so funny, even someone who, like Peter Singer, I have a begrudging respect for Singer because he is an extremely intelligent individual. He's very smart, and because he's so smart, he's willing to hold perfectly consistent beliefs, even if they're wrong. So, for example, on abortion, he says, no, it's obvious that an unborn child is a human being, and there's no morally relevant difference between a human fetus and a newborn.
But you can kill both.
But you just kill both. So his views are hard to refute because they're so consistent.
Yeah, right.
So, and that's a virtue, at least to that he's thought it through. And so he sees here, well, wait a minute. Why are you saying this is an attack? If Folau is right, you should be listening to him and doing what he has to say. That's what we need to be talking about here. But in our world, people just don't want to stop and think. It's just, that offends me, I'm canceling it. It's part of cancel culture, which is a big thing people are talking about now.
What does that mean, cancel culture?
Cancel culture is the idea, and this is brought up a little bit. We're talking about Church in the News. It's brought up a little bit in Dave Chappelle's new comedy stand-up special, Sticks and Stones, actually. He takes aim at this.
Are there any swear words in that?
There may be a few.
Okay.
Yes, there are a few indeed. So so you might categorize it as morally offensive for mature audiences. But I appreciate some of the truths that come through there. And so there are a lot of people who are very secular who will say something that is not politically correct. We used to call this political correctness in the 90s.
Oh, and now it's called cancel culture?
Yes, because now with social media, if you do something politically incorrect, a mob can form online and then demand that you be canceled because you're...
That's going to happen to you, Trent. That's got to happen to you. You are like the perfect guy to cancel because you say things that are...
But here's the problem. I am someone who it's expected I say these kind of loopy things because I work for Catholic Answers.
Oh.
Now, if I were Trent Horn and I worked in Hollywood, maybe as Miles Teller's stunt double, some people say I bear a passing resemblance to him. They might say, we don't want him working in this movie. Like, if it's like you're in the secular rugby team or you're in Hollywood or a Fortune 500 company, that is where you end up getting canceled because people.
So if you get out of line, we're going to cancel your ticket to be here in Hollywood or
whatever. It's not just that. It could be anything. So people like Chappelle have been critical of comedians. Like people, you make one mistake, you say something. Cancel culture is this idea, it's kind of a virtual lynch mob.
Yeah.
That you say one off-color thing. You make a mistake in your past.
Yeah.
And you said something inappropriate. Or you told a joke that was inappropriate. You put it online. And then it can find you 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, and people say, you're done. We're canceling you. You deserve to be canceled. You can't say, I'm sorry, I was young when I said that. That was inappropriate. I've learned from then.
Right.
People are not allowed to grow. It's just, it's out. It's a search and destroy kind of mission for people.
Yeah. I have to say, I don't think Jesus would approve of that.
We have a little thing called mercy and repentance.
That has nothing to do, like, if you're involved in that, you got to get away from that. If you're involved in cancel culture, because that is inimical to the gospel.
It foments anger and not wanting mercy
and
or
self-righteousness.
Yes,
and come on.
And it's also hard because it gives people. Well, here I can have my own little rant right now. It gives people, and I get into a trap on social media where I give it too much importance. It's like I'll debate people too much on social media. But I encourage everyone listening, don't take social media that seriously. That honestly,
who cares?
The opinions people have on Twitter and Facebook, they don't really matter. They're not that representative. Now, I'm on social media because I believe St. Paul would be on social media. It's the new Areopagus to spread the gospel. And I want to be on that platform to reach people. So I think it's important, but I've also had a hard time, and I'm trying to manage not giving it more time and attention and energy than it deserves. Because the problem with cancel culture is you'll have, oh gosh, these thousands of people on Twitter are demanding this person be fired or demanding this rugby player be kicked out of the team. When actually...
You can't play rugby because you have a Christian thought.
That's right.
That's evil.
And that the problem here is people say, well, it's discrimination, right? But you're not allowing him to have his sincere Christian beliefs. He's not using a slur. He's not saying anything about these. He's saying this behavior is sinful, and I'm concerned about those who engage in it. But the thing with, take Twitter, for example. I think the statistics show that only 20% of the population has a Twitter account, and among those accounts, something like only 2 to 5% of them are responsible for 80% of social media conduct on Twitter. So you'll get
that's
people
like 1% of the actual population.
That's right. So when you think Twitter and Facebook are reflective of what the real world thinks, it's not true. And so you can get sucked into this rabbit hole where we'll have people listening here to our radio show who will go online and argue for hours and hours with people on social media. And I would say, I think a lot of times that's for naught.
Yeah,
that your time could be better spent in the Adoration Chapel. Or if you see someone on social media get into an argument with them, say, I don't want to talk with you here. Can we have an email exchange? Can I call you on the phone? And I have seen in my own interactions that I had someone on social media who was very critical of me. And I had him come into the studio to have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Completely different. He apologized for being rude, and we had a civil conversation.
How interesting.
You can't do that on social media very well. So that's why I'm skeptical about it.
You do have to get a bit of a, I don't care what they're saying on social media. I mean, we have to not turn over our moral agency to the people who are making the decisions about what goes on entertainment tonight, or what the next sitcom is going to be. That is a power you don't want those folks to have,
right?
Especially if they're canceling, if they're going around canceling people. And you know what? Also, as Christians, if somebody's an anti-Christian and they're a rugby player, don't try to get them kicked off the rugby team because they're anti-Christian. That's not our. That's
right.
Not,
if there was an atheist on a team says Christianity is delusional, I'd say, well, let's have a conversation with him.
Not like you. I'm going to take your job away.
Yeah.
I don't want you to make a living playing rugby.
Right.
I mean, I really don't think anybody should make a living playing rugby. I don't actually know why. Well, that's not. I'm sure rugby is a perfectly fine sport.
I would want to join in with you in this side, but the problem is I don't entirely know the ins and outs of rugby. I just know, like, my understanding of rugby is it's like a hardcore combination of football and soccer.
And knife fighting, I think. I think it's a combo.
You get beat up pretty. They get beat up pretty well in rugby.
It's like mixed martial arts.
I'm more of an air hockey guy myself.
All right, 888. So Australia, get your act together. Is that where you come down on this? Come on.
Well, I would say but it's not just there. You see this kind of thing here all the time. Where where you see the president of Mozilla Firefox, for example, was found out he donated to a campaign to define marriage as the union of a man and woman, and they said, "Oh, he's anti-gay. He's got to go." He gets fired from the company. That now we're moving to the point where your Christian beliefs. It's not that we can have disagreement in the public square about contemporary issues. It's just you are guilty of a secular heresy and you get excommunicated.
Yeah,
and so that's concerning. That Christians, we won't be able to share the gospel. That we will just be essentially shut out from the conversation entirely. That's concerning.
The worst, though, is when the companies themselves do it. Like if Facebook, succumbs to pressure, and Twitter succumbs to pressure, and then you, Trent Horn, can't be on there anymore.
Yeah, that's called deplatforming.
Yeah,
and that is something that has come up because here we have a problem here is that Facebook and Twitter are private companies.
Yeah,
but they've created essentially public squares where most people engage in debate and dialogue with one another. If they end up controlling the message and only allowing certain people certain views to be heard, then suddenly a large group with a very important view, the gospel, become shut out and others can't hear it.
Yeah.
So we should hold them accountable and make them see, well, show your true colors. Either say you admit you have a bias or have an unbiased platform.
Also on that Twitter thing,
yes,
the president is on Twitter. I don't know if you knew that, but President Donald Trump occasionally will tweet.
I have heard that he tweets every now and then.
Yeah.
I have heard that, but I only follow two people on Twitter.
You really
two
do?
Accounts. I follow Catholic Answers,
and
the Pope. So I think I'll listen to what they got to say. My boss and my other boss.
I don't think it's really the Pope.
You don't think that's
no? I think he hired. I think it really is the president.
Well, I don't know. We have social media people here at Catholic Answers. I don't think Chris does every single tweet that we send out.
I don't think Chris knows how to. We'll be right back with more Church in the World with Trent Horn right after this.
Glad you're with us. Join us on air with your questions today on Catholic Answers Live.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
Catherine Zeltner.
There are so many misconceptions when it comes to abortion and assisted suicide. It's really confusing, and I think for a lot of people, they don't know how to talk about these things. EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, we help to change that. We help to really untangle these web of lies. Listeners can expect to become informed and then grow more confident so they can then discuss and dialogue these issues, and together we can really impact culture in that way.
EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Sunday morning at 10 a.m. on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, 888-318-7884. The number, Trent Horn, our guest until he gets canceled by cancel culture. Let's go to some calls, Trent. Let's start with...
Well, actually, Cy, I could get canceled.
Yeah.
Because I have my podcast, TrentHornPodcast.com, right now is hosted on Patreon. And so it's possible people may say that Trent Horn is violating Patreon terms of service because he says homosexual behavior is intrinsically disordered, it's sinful, or I talk about transgender identity or a host of other things. So it's Patreon has canceled other people for having views that they disagree with. And so for me, it's something, and I know people, Matt Fradd, for example, who was formerly with Catholic Answers and now does Pints with Aquinas. He was disinvited from Google because they found out, they looked at one tweet he had where he said that homosexual behavior is disordered. And the LGBT group at Google said he makes us unsafe. So he was disinvited.
I don't think you get it. All that LGBT, it's about tolerance and patience and loving people.
Right, for everyone, right?
For everyone, Trent. Let us go now to Jerry in Olympia, Washington, listening, on WETN Radio. Jerry, we made you wait a long time. Your question or comment for Trent?
Okay, earlier you spoke about the church being against democratic socialism.
Yes, it's really hard to hear you, Jerry. Trent was talking.
Is this any better?
Yeah, just give it everything you got.
Okay. Earlier you talked about democratic socialism being the church being against that, and I'm thinking all they're asking for is Social Security, universal Medicare, and free college education. Why is the church against them?
Okay. I didn't say that the church was against democratic socialism. I said the church is against socialism, and then I said, but what about democratic socialism, which is something that we do address in the book. What should Catholics believe about democratic socialism? And it depends what you mean by the term. So we define socialism as government control of the means of production. So government owns businesses, it redistributes wealth, so that people are not able to maintain control and grow private property. So, but what is democratic socialism? Well, it means different things to different people. And in fact, Pope Pius XI talked about moderate socialism in his encyclical Quadragesimo Anno. And he says that moderate socialism does not have anything in it that differs from Christian charity. So it's redundant. There's no reason for Catholics to embrace moderate socialism, such as, and there's, that relates somewhat to what we would call social welfare, the idea of government providing benefits for people. So you're talking about social welfare programs. Government gives people money for healthcare, gives them Social Security income, provides them money for college or pays for college itself. The problem becomes as you move along the spectrum towards government owning the means of production. So, for example, food stamps are social welfare. That's the government giving people some resources so that they can afford things like food and things like that. When the government owns grocery stores and sells food at lower than market prices for people and outlaws private competition, that's socialism. And that's something you have in Venezuela, which leads to shortages and leads to all kinds of terrible things. All socialist governments invariably end up with shortages because they violate basic laws of economics related to supply and demand. So it depends what you mean by democratic socialism. If it's a kind of moderate socialism that's social welfare programs to help people, then that's fine, but that's not socialism. If it's a lot of people, when you read in Jacobin Magazine and the Democratic Socialists of America, people use the term democratic socialism to mean the implementation of socialism, the end of free markets and private property through a democratic process. If that is what is meant by democratic socialism, Catholics cannot be democratic socialists. Socialism is inappropriate whether you get it through one demand of a dictator or 51% of the vote.
Jerry, thanks. We'll leave it there because we want to get to more callers. Robert in Toledo, Ohio, listening on the GRN app. You are next. Robert, your question for Trent Horn.
Toledo, Ohio, it's actually Aledo, Texas. Sorry if I wasn't talking too clearly.
It wasn't Marie's fault. Don't blame Marie, the phone screener, okay? It was not her fault. Go ahead, Robert.
All right, so Disney has been getting a lot of flack from people who usually like it. Like, one of the most recent things...
Wait, who has been getting flack?
Disney.
My
question is, what are you to do about mega corporations like Disney, who, when they acquired 20th Century Fox, essentially has become the owner of every major TV news network in the U.S., which, as I recall, violates antitrust law.
Sure, and I think actually this gets into a little bit in a tangent to our book on socialism and capitalism. So what should Catholics believe about that? Even capitalism itself, we don't argue for an unbridled, laissez-faire, hands-off kind of capitalism. There can be dangers in free market economies of things like monopolies existing. So a monopoly would occur when one provider of a good or service has complete control over that, and no one else can enter the market to provide that kind of good or service. However, typically throughout history, monopolies can really only occur with government backing or through other kinds of legal restrictions. Because if you have a free market and you have one organization that provides the good or service, it loses its monopolistic hold if it raises prices too high, for example, and then competitors can come in to offer the same service at a lower price. Though there will be cases, of course, then some people can maintain a monopoly if you get government to outlaw competition, utilizing patents and things like that. So, for example, people have said that Disney, in order to get back Spider-Man into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, should just buy Sony outright. And I don't. They probably could. They may be rich enough to do that, but they probably can't because you're right. That would violate antitrust laws. So, what we talk about in our book on socialism is that the nitty-gritty elements of capitalism, Catholics can reasonably disagree about how to have a fair, just, and equitable system in a free market. It just has to correspond to what the popes have called principles of right order. And so people can disagree about how to keep businesses regulated so that unfair or unjust monopolies don't arise. My personal opinion is that if you allow for free market activity to occur, if you can prevent hindrances or obstacles from people entering the market, that can help to break up monopolies. So I think that it's also important when we look at, when we look at other news media sources, mass communication, we have to be careful that sometimes if media is part of a conglomerate, we might only be getting half the story on things. So that's why when you hear stories about the Catholic Church, about other things like that, check for the bias. And what's nice about the internet is you can peruse a lot of different sources to try to get the whole story. So hope that's helpful, and thank you for calling.
Okay, Robert, thank you very, very much. Again, 888-31-TRUTH, the number. Oh, we're talking about the church in the world. I better get to John in Sydney, Australia. John, we're coming to Sydney, Australia. I don't know if you know about that. Are you there with us, John?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, Catholic Answers is coming to Sydney, Australia on the weekend of October 11th.
Oh, okay, no worries. Well, you guys have got an awesome show. I'm always listening to your videos and to your live streams, and it's really fantastic. I love it. It's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. You got something about the church in the world?
Well, actually, I'm just digressing a little bit over here. I just wanted to ask, why is it I seem to get conflicting advice from even clergy as to the authenticity of figures in the Old Testament? Like, for example, when we talk about the book of Job and and even Genesis and so forth. Even some clergy tell me that these are fictional characters who never even existed.
Right.
I mean, that'd be a bit weird. It's not as if the church just all of a sudden invents figures to fit a jigsaw puzzle, does it?
For those who have trouble with Australian, also the connection isn't great, John.
The question is, John seems like he's heard conflicting answers about questions related to the Bible. Specifically, are certain characters in the Bible, do they correspond to real historical persons, or are they fictional persons, part of a fictional account? So, for example, some people say that Job is a historical individual and that the book of Job is a historical account. Other people say that Job is a fictional character as part of a didactic narrative, a story meant to teach a valuable lesson. So how should we respond to that? Well, first I'll say that the church does not have a definitive teaching about every question we have related to the Bible. In fact, the church has relatively few definitive or infallible teachings about truths that are related to sacred scripture. Now, what she does have are those that are the ones that are central to our faith, that Jesus is a real historical individual. He was born of a virgin, crucified, rose from the dead. That is not something that is just purely fictional or allegorical. But there are other questions biblical scholars raise in their study of Scripture that the church has not officially weighed in on. And because of that, the church allows a diversity of opinions on many of these questions that are raised and allows biblical scholars to engage in their field of expertise to answer them. So when it comes to genre, I think we can agree, I think we'll all agree that there are some genres in Scripture, there are some stories in Scripture that are purely stories. Most people would say that the parable of the prodigal son is a fictional story Jesus told for the purpose of communicating a truth to people, that there wasn't an actual historical prodigal son. But on the other hand, there's historical elements. So some people say that Job is a historical individual, but even Pope St. John Paul II said that the book of Job, the book of Judith, seem to have elements, or Tobit are more like didactic fiction, but the church allows a diversity of opinion on those questions that is not definitively settled.
John from Sydney, Australia, thanks for the call. Hope you have a good morning. I forgot to ask him what tomorrow's going to be like.
John, I'm going to say g'day to you. Stay on the line. I'd like to send John my book, Hard Sayings. It goes into some more detail. John, stay on the line. G'day to you, and I want to get you hard sayings.
Thanks, Trent Horn.
Thank you, Cy Kellett.
We'll see you next time, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.
The show's boomeranging around to people. That was terrible.
Trent, that's the worst, Australia. Come on, Trent.
Crikey.